CHA, they did a survey with a fellow, I believe, that was kind of talking about exactly this topic overall. So I thought that might be a good way um, to enter into our discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone is willing to kind of help me stall for a second while I had meant to be more prepared than this, but I have to find something in my files. But anyway, yes. So I'm the Director of Preservation Services at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. Many of you are probably familiar with us, but for anyone who's not, we're a nonprofit. We are based in Philadelphia, but we work all over the country, mostly, a little bit internationally as well, but mostly all over the country to do preservation needs assessments for organizations and training with organizations. So if you're not familiar with us, but you are familiar with NEDCC, we're pretty similar in scope, but we are all a paper-based conservation lab. Preservation-wise, we work with everything, all types of collections. But so we have, for the past, this is the third round, we have had Preventive Conservation Fellows working with us. It's an NEH funded fellowship, and we have had, it's intended to be for newer professionals who've gone through conservation training, to expose them to more the kind of holistic preservation collections care side of things. So we had a paper conservator for our first fellow, we had an objects conservator for our second fellow, and our fellow who just left about 2 weeks ago is actually trained as a conservation scientist. So it's really awesome for us getting to work with, like recent graduates, new professionals in the field who are coming from a very technical background, but we're trying to help them learn about kind of adapting and scaling their schooling to the actual needs in the field. So and we have, as part of the fellowship, the fellows always do a research project at the end of their fellowship. It is supposed to be working directly with an organization to help them like implement preservation needs that have been discovered. But since Emma's fellowship was over half virtual, she ended up deciding to do a survey. So we sent out a survey to just about all of the organizations in our database, so several thousand organizations of all types. So not just archival collections, but museums, libraries, archives, historic sites, etc. And we got a response back from of good responses from about 180 institutions. And they were all focused. Some of you may have seen the survey. Some of you may not have. It was all focused just generally on kind of what we're talking about today. How did you cope, and what were any kind of challenges during the shutdown? So let's see. Almost the majority of the responses were either history or natural history museums, with archives representing slightly less than archives, libraries together representing slightly less than 20%. So it wasn't a terribly archival focused survey, but yeah, so basically it just asked questions on kind of whether institutions experienced any major disasters while closed. Fortunately, most did not. 16% of respondents did experience some water-related issues. They might not have quite escalated to the point of disaster, but water hazards, I guess, increases in relative humidity, leaking pipes, roof infiltrations, etc. I think if I could share some of the positive upsides of the silver linings where we can find them of shutting down. 34% of respondents took advantage of the closure time to do a more thorough cleaning of collection storage spaces than they might otherwise have done. 38%, and again, remember, this is a bit museum heavy, but 38% of respondents changed or refurbished their exhibition space. And a smaller, slightly smaller, but still I think pretty good percentage, about 32%, indicated that the closure timeframe was also used for conducting renovation projects or repairs that could not have been undertaken in such a short time if the institution was not closed to visitors, researchers, etc. So, you know, I think maybe it will be interesting as part of this conversation today to think about what other types of silver linings did we experience? What were we able to kind of move forward on? And I know that's one of the questions that we're going to be discussing. So, you know, I definitely don't want to occupy too much time by going through this. I just wanted to share a little bit of some of the takeaways, but this will be published as an article, not like anything formal, but an article just through our website. So if you get CCAHA's newsletter, it'll be coming through in the November issue. If you don't, you'll be able to find it just on our website, and we'll probably promote it otherwise anyway. So yeah, I guess, does anyone have any questions for me? I can definitely share more results or impacts if anyone's interested, but I didn't, yeah, I don't know. Any questions? Any questions about kind of what we asked or what we found? And if not, I'm more than happy to move on.
Thank you so much. I know I totally put you on the spot there. I didn't let you know ahead of time. I was going to start with you. So yeah, I think that gives a really good overview of the types of things that we might be dealing with or discovering in our collection. So now I do want to open it up to everyone. And I guess I haven't quite thought about how we would do this yet. I was just thinking that you could unmute yourself and you can follow the prompts that are on the screen and let us know what's happening at your organizations after the closure. Or if you're still working from home. Let's see. Oh, I hear someone unmuting. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
Maybe
the
not.
other thing that people could do is if you click on the participants box, that will let you answer yes or no to the questions. So you could do that as a way for us to sort of get a quick sense of what happened. So if for example, we had several disasters. So I'm going to I put a green check on my name, and other folks can do the same. I see at least one red X. A couple.
Oh, that's a perfect solution. And I'm seeing a couple other green checks as well. So why don't we start with Emily Ryer?
Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Emily Ryer, and I'm the archivist at the Women in Leadership Archives at Loyola University Chicago. So over the summer, we actually had a little bit of flooding. So we are located in a historic mansion. So our collection storage area is in the basement, and our reading room is on the 3rd floor of the building, so the basement and the attic, of course. We'd had some troubles with water before, so when we knew that we were going to be working from home we did order some additional water monitors that we could have set up remotely and be alerted in that way, and also took special care to make sure that collections were off of the ground, on pallets if need be, if we didn't have shelf space, et cetera, et cetera. So we were not allowed back on campus in any sort of regular way, ongoing way, until the beginning of fall semester. And a couple of months into working from home, we were alerted that there had been some water. So the good news is that it didn't actually quite reach the collection. So thankfully we had those pallets. But again, I think just having that knowledge beforehand that none of us knew how long we'd be at home for. So just kind of preparing in that way. The one other kind of interesting thing is because no one was allowed access, we were allowed special access after restoration work was done, just to come in and make sure and kind of check on the collections and make sure that everything was okay. Everything was fine. And it's really kind of changed our thinking going forward for more of that long-term, things that were in the midst of being processed and unprocessed collections. We have been storing them a little bit differently than our processed collections. So we've had to rethink that quite a bit. That if normally if there's some sort of incident, one of us would be on hand, one of our staff, to kind of work with any contractors or with our facilities crew to make sure things are being handled in a certain way. But again, in this COVID setting, we weren't really allowed to do that. So we've been thinking differently about our storage. And with the budget that we do have and the savings that we do have, instead of relying on pallets, we've been looking at sort of inexpensive rolling shelving and things of that nature that you can just get from a hardware store, those types of things, like home improvement stores. So we're, as time allows, we're sort of shifting our, again, sort of in-process collections to that type of storage, so that should this happen again, it will just be easier for us to maneuver the collections, have them a little bit more mobile, and continue to have them off the floor.
That's very cool. Sounds like a really great creative solution, and also thinking for we might have to close again. That could happen kind of anytime. It seems like. Okay, the next person I'm seeing is Elizabeth Cesar. If you're available.
She says we
ahead.
can skip her.
Oh, okay. Then I see Heather Parks.
We had sort of a mixed bag. We did have a water issue. The facilities department did not handle it when I reported it because I was going in once a week just to verify everything was okay. And the next week I went in and surprise, it was mold. So a few people got chewed out along the way, not necessarily by me, but we do have a much better relationship now with the facilities department. I don't think they realized how involved the preservation needed to be within the building structure. So I would be calling them at 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, this water alarm's going off. Do you need me to come in there? Go check it. And they'd kind of act like they had never even heard of such a thing as a water alarm. So I think the preservation department and that facilities department, that's probably been the biggest upshot of all of this, is starting to work together more now.
Yeah, that's a silver lining for sure, starting to build those relationships a little bit more, and kind of being forced into it in a way is a good way to get that started. I was also thinking, like Gianni was saying, our organization, NEDCC, is very similar to CCAHA, lots of acronyms as well. And we field a lot of calls from people, help out with disaster situations. And I've heard from several people over the closure who had issues like that, a water leak or something like that, and then weren't able to check in on it regularly. So certainly having mold growth and other compounding issues on top of that. I also heard from people who weren't allowed to go on site, obviously, because they're working from home and they weren't part of that essential crew that was checking out the building. And then the facilities team decided to turn off HVAC to save costs while no one was working. And again, had a lot of resulting issues from that, including mold growth, because it gets pretty humid in the summer in many areas in the US. Okay, let me scroll through the list here, see if I'm catching everyone. Think I got everyone. Unless Kara, were you just testing or did you have
No, I mean, we had 2 mold outbreaks as a result of some HVAC issues. And it's interesting because we actually usually have a great relationship with facilities, and they know to contact us. And in one situation, they decided to turn off, as you said, they decided to turn off the HVAC systems and didn't tell anyone. Which was a surprise when I finally figured out what the cause of the mold was, because it's also a relatively recently renovated. So I wondered if it was a fail of the install, and it turns out that's not what it was. But the other situation was actually in the archives, and it was because we had staff, even while we were closed, we had staff who did walk the stacks on a regular basis, and they noticed that there was some dripping. So just sort of, if you do have the ability to do walkthroughs like Heather was, or like our staff was, being able to catch those things is really important, but it's also really hard if you don't, if you're not able to get back in. So I love the idea of ordering more water monitors. I love the idea of, I didn't think I needed to check in with facilities staff. I figured they had enough issues going on. And like I said, we had a good relationship, but just reminding myself that if we were to close again, checking in with them, I think is really important to prevent, to make sure that they remember that the libraries is one of those places where those cost saving measures are not appropriate. And now I get to learn how to use my new freezer in order to deal with the mold. So that's the silver lining for me, is that I'm playing around with a new freezer.
Very cool. I'm just doing another quick run through. I don't want to miss anyone that wanted to add to the conversation. And then I can go to our next main topic here. There we go. Hopefully I didn't, yeah, there we go. I have a reconfiguration of how I set this up, so I'm dealing with different buttons on different screens, but there we go. So now I would like to kind of direct the conversation to what you discovered when you returned to work. So I know that some of you have been dealing with really complicated work schedules to try to not have too many people working at the same time. And we also, within the Preservation Section Steering Committee, we're talking about this complication of training, especially for something like preservation work that you're going to be doing that's hands-on, and not really being able to do this hands-on training with your new staff or with your student workers, especially if you return to work for the fall semester. So again, we'll use this very cool process of just marking yes or no in the participants list, and then I can make sure that you each get a chance to say your piece. Oh, and I'm not seeing red or green yet, but don't be shy. Oh, I just saw one, it blipped through. Sylvia, go ahead.
Hey, sure. So at Harvard, we're still mostly working remotely. My archives, especially, I've been the only one who's been able to go to campus. We've been away now for, oh my gosh, 8 months. And getting to go to campus is really quite difficult at this point. It requires, my boss has to sign off on it. It goes through HR. There are all of these protocols in place, and then I have to get a COVID test on site for that day. And then being there has just been, it's been wonderful. I mean, I've absolutely missed it, getting to work with the collections. But one of the things that I think is tricky, and I was sharing with other people, is moths. We have had, it kind of ties in a little bit to the previous slide, but with the without people being there, and I'm guessing it's not getting probably the vacuuming or cleaning that it typically gets, clothing moths. We have a webbing moths issue, and they are just, they're everywhere. And so that's been really tricky. Just being able to serve our patrons and our clients has been really, really tough remotely. We work with varied clientele at Harvard, so we're not necessarily academic. We also serve our Office of General Counsel. They're one of our primary users. And so just getting in to figure out a way that I'm going to supply them with documents in a room, just the whole process of using the archives has gotten really difficult. I'd love to hear other people on that.
If I could just add something to the pest issue, one of the things that our my former fellow pointed out is it was really the perfect / worst timing for shutdowns regarding pests, mid-spring or early mid-spring, when, you know, pest situations are changing and often exacerbating anyway. And if you have an IPM program in place, chances are at some point during the like most extreme months of closure in March and April, that would have been a key time to be checking on traps and spaces and everything. So yeah, we definitely heard from a number of organizations, specifically with moths, same, that yeah, that was an unfortunate event.
I'm curious how many people actually are back in the archives full time. I talked to someone last week who said that their entire staff was back, but could you give a yes check if you're, we won't make you talk, I promise. If you're back full time? So it doesn't look like very many people. I haven't done my own.
Yeah, I'm definitely still working from home. I was actually traveling right before the main shutdown. And NEDCC is just north of Boston, so a very similar schedule to Harvard. But I was traveling when it happened, so I came home and was kind of doing a self-imposed quarantine before I went back to work, and then the shutdown happened. So I've been working from home for a very long time. I am allowed to go into work. We reopened as soon as we could in Massachusetts. And like Deani was explaining, we have a very different mission with the type of work that we do than having a library or archives or a museum, that we're working with collections. So it's interesting. I can go in, and I have been going in to work on projects where I need more space or I need access to the conservation labs, who have been open since, I want to say May. I'm not quite sure when the actual opening date was, or if I just need to be there. But it's usually just for a day here and there, and I do let them know ahead of time, and we have our own protocols in place for our center. But I also wanted to chime in because what we do a lot is also training. And we do workshops and in-person trainings and things like that. So a little different than staff training, absolutely. And one of the things that I've been working on over the past few months is converting our salvage workshop, wet salvage techniques, and doing some practice with actual materials and trying to convert that to a online but still hands-on experience. So I just completed a couple of workshops online where we had to ship kits out to the participants so that they had something to work on at their own homes or offices if they were back at work. It was quite the project. it was a lot of work, but it was also very much of a silver lining to be able to still offer something like that. All right, I'm going to scroll through the list again and see if there's anyone else that has anything to say about training or being back at work.
I just cleared
Oh,
the
okay.
list. I'm
That's okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Because we switched questions. I will say I have a I run the preservation department, and none of us are ever in any of our spaces at the same time, and that's been really hard in terms of trying to train students, just trying to have conversations with each other and plan work. We leave notes for each other. There's a lot of, I leave notes on the whiteboard. We communicate via, our Slack messaging system, but I had all these plans to do some training this year with the staff that just hasn't happened. And so trying to figure out for 2021, if we're still in this, and it looks like we're gonna have a modified schedule at least through the end of the school year. Can we use cameras? Can the conservator do repairs with cameras and have the rest of us watch from far away? We do have plexiglass that we have installed in our preservation lab space and in our archives in the processing areas. But we're still trying to avoid all being there at the same time. And it does make problem solving, I think, a lot more difficult. We do have some in-person reference. I work a shift Wednesday mornings, and you have to sign up, and there's only a few people who can come to the reading room. And even how we interact on the reference desk, we used to have people come and ask questions, and nobody comes and asks questions because that all happens remotely. And like my job right now in the reading room is to do things like open and shut the door for the patrons. That's one of the big things I do. And I literally just watch them and make sure there are no care and handling concerns. So it's a very different reference desk experience than we used to have, because we want to make sure that those high touch surfaces, that people are not touching those surfaces. And so it's very strange. And I used to love working the reference desk, and it's fine now, but it's not nearly as enjoyable and interactive in the same way, because most of those queries are happening remotely, and only the people who have to get in and use the stuff, who can't use a scanned image, are coming in. And I'm curious if other people are serving patrons, and if they are do they doing it in the same way, and sort of segues into the next set of questions about quarantine and disinfecting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I kind of accidentally switched the slide, and I was like, oh, actually, like you said, it's a perfect segue into the next set of questions or prompts that we have here. And I also noticed that Heather had the green check mark. So if you wanted to go ahead and add to that, you're welcome to.
Okay, just that one of the things we decided to do was not to have students at all, because I wasn't seeing a practical way to train them without being close by and kind of over their shoulders and them over my shoulders. And we just decided not to use students this year. But another issue that I found with the bug traps, yes, I was allowed on campus, but it was with a police officer, campus police, shadowing me. So I didn't go check bug traps with him like over my shoulder. And so we had so many months of no one checking bug traps. And in the end, we had, it was insane, the amount of bugs in these traps. But the change was that there were more of the carnivorous bugs that were eating the dead bugs. We knew about book lice, but it was the other bugs that are now eating the book lice that we weren't counting on. So it was very interesting to try to check those traps. And it took a very, very long time to get that done. As far as this next slide, one of the things that we're doing is that the patron has to request the item 3 days ahead of time. We put them on the cart with the patron's name on it. They show up, they look at what they want to look at, and then it goes back for 3 more days before it can be put back on the shelf. And that is specific to special collections.
Great, thank you. And I also finally noticed that there's some discussion happening in the chat as well. So I guess it probably won't be necessary for me to read them out loud to all of you, but just know that it's there. And there's certainly some echoes of talking about quarantining, alternating work schedules, and then using appointment only situations to get researchers in there. And let me do another scroll here of the participants to see if there are any other stories or questions or situations people would like to discuss as far as quarantining collections. And I guess while I'm doing that, or while you're gathering your thoughts, I can talk about something I've recently finally gotten to watching too, or watching, and also just have been following up with. Throughout this whole thing is the Realm project, the reopening libraries, museums, libraries, archives, libraries, and museums. I had to make the acronym work. And they've been doing a lot of studies specifically related to library materials and helping organizations make decisions about quarantining. It's not a cut and dried answer. There's no way to completely eliminate risk. So there's really no way to tell anyone exactly what they need to be doing to make sure that their collections are safe for use. But they recently had a webinar. It was last week, I think. I watched the recording, it's available, but I highly recommend checking out their resources, reading the studies. I think they also just released the most recent study just a couple of days ago as well. So a lot of great information as far as how to quarantine your collections or help with making those decisions, because it's tricky when you're like, oh, you should just leave them for a long time. It's kind of hard to manage that in organizations. Okay, I've been rambling on. I'm gonna check again for any more people that are trying to get a word in here. And there we go. And also, just like Kara was saying earlier, these unexpected, and Deani, I think also, any sort of projects you've been able to complete, any surprises and good things that have come out of this whole thing, or any other sort of situation you'd like to workshop or discuss, or just let some steam, or I'm not using the right phrase there, but I'm sure you all know what I mean.
I mean, I'll just echo, this is just kind of, yeah, echoing, but I am really, really interested to hear how folks spent their time, you know, as preservation professionals when you're not in the space. Are you updating policies? Are you, doing anything with processing or cleaning up inventories? Or I'm just really curious to hear kind of firsthand experiences of what types of projects you have been able to move forward.
Adrienne, go ahead.
One of the things that we did this year, because we couldn't have students as we traditionally would, was hire a group of students to be what we're calling roving archivists, to make contact with student organizations on campus and let them know we exist and pick up publications and stuff like that. And so even though we haven't been able to work, usually we would have students doing processing work, and instead we've sort of flipped it to outreach this semester, but that's actually been pretty successful so far. So that was one of the things we're working on. We're also working on a description survey to look at older description in our collections, places where the terminology is no longer what we would prefer to use. And those are all things that can be done remotely. So, but we haven't been able to go in and check on our collections. And we did have a leak right before we closed. There was a boiler explosion in the basement of a building on campus. And so I had to send everything off site. And then the materials were stored with that vendor for much longer than anyone would have wished, and came back kind of smushed. So that was sad. But not being able to be in to check on things is kind of driving me crazy. And if at some point during this discussion, someone wanted to talk about specific tools that they're using to check on things remotely, I would love to hear about that.
So I think it depended for us. We have 8 full-time employees who work in the preservation department specifically, and we work very closely with special collections and the archives. And it depended on the staff person's role, how well they have done in the working from home. I have one staff person, my digital preservation librarian, who was already slated to be working from home the vast majority of the time. Her job has changed like virtually not at all, other than she hasn't been able to do is she had hoped to do some hands-on training on our Fred machine, which she, you know, she hasn't been able to do transfers of specific media types, but most of her transfers happen in other ways. A lot of us have used this time to learn about web crawling, and so we're actually documenting COVID-19 in Central Virginia. And so a wide variety of us, myself included, learned how to use Web Recorder and have been documenting the community's response. And so it's allowed us to work on this collaborative web-based collecting project, which in the past that has been limited to far fewer people. And so I think that's been a good silver lining, is that we have had a wider range of folks who have learned how to use those tools. We actually, we're doing a small amount of repairs at home. We're doing heat set mending, not for special collections materials, but for the circulating collection. We checked them out to ourselves. You know, I talked with HR. They felt like the risk management was taken care of and that they were officially working. And we had this huge backlog of Japanese stab bindings that had been pest eaten. And we were never, ever in a million years gonna really get in there and be able to mend those things. So we've gotten a lot of those mended. And that was something particularly
quarantine suggestions, just to be using quarantining rather than applying any items as seeing from the realm results for sure. Let's see here. I'm behind now in the chat for sure, and I might have missed a couple of items to summarize. I don't want to miss anything. We do have with but we have fundamentals of AV preservation, questions in depth, and that I was course of Preservation 101, which is really exciting. I really like that a lot. Okay, well, I also feel like I'm just babbling on, so please feel free to hit that yes button in the participants list, and I'll make sure that you have a chance to talk, or you can certainly just go ahead and unmute yourself if there's any other responses as well.
I'm curious about the Wi-Fi or the water leak monitors. When we first purchased ours, there weren't other Wi-Fi water monitors. So we went with the Honeywell, which are intended for home use. And they've worked fine. The only downside of them is that because it's meant for home use, I'm the only, the alerts come to my cell phone. They don't go to the rest of the preservation staff. So that's been our only complaint. And I was just curious what other, you know, if there are others available now that are Wi-Fi.
Does anyone have any suggestions? I'm noticing that in the chat box, same experience using alarms that are meant for home use. I kind of wonder if that is part of that smart technology where they can send the alarm can send you a push notification to your cell phone. If that is more of a creation for home use, I don't know. I mean, I know it's available for facilities departments, but
Right. When I was in the market for it, everything that was meant for an institution was the kind that would just have an audible alarm, which does no good on the weekend or when we're closed up.
We did look into some systems that would have basically tied into the whole facilities board, but they were more than we could spend in a month in March. So
and I'm curious about access too, because some of these things are so specialized that it would make sense that during a pandemic, and also trying to coordinate all of this from your home office and not necessarily having access to your administration and facilities departments and communication overall, it'd be pretty tricky to really have something that needs installation and coordination overall, I imagine. And Heather, I just saw your got published thing in the chat. Congratulations. You're getting many congratulations if you haven't seen them yet. Oh, you did. I see that now.
It was actually on the LASCAR data logger, so
sort of
applicable.
Oh, and Deani, was that a high five or a raising hand?
No, I was clapping for Heather.
Oh, cool. Yay. All right, I'm going to scroll through, but same thing. This is just kind of open discussion. If you have anything to contribute or anything you want to get off your chest, please go ahead and let us know.
Are there other topics that folks want to talk about?
Yes, absolutely. You're not tied to what's on the screen here. Sarah, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, apologies. Don't do this very often. I just wanted to thank the organizations who were kind enough to put out free materials with online webinars and seminars, etc. It's been a great avenue for my team to actually participate. Usually we're limited to 1 or 2 a year. So I want to thank those organizations that have stepped up to the plate and made it free, because I've learned an awful lot. It has opened a lot of avenues for lots of folks on my team to actually participate and join them. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, that's great. And also, I mean, of course, another part of this is that budgets have been cut, and absolutely, you want to be able to do these extra things, but there's not necessarily the money available to do that. So yeah, I absolutely understand that. And then Tina, I also see you.
Hi, I just was curious for people who have started going back to work or kind of making plans for that for their staff. How are you thinking about like things like lunch and eating? Because shared cafeterias are going to be a problem and things like that, and eating in collection areas is a major problem. And I was just wondering if people have had thoughts on that, about how you're going to handle something like that.
we're in upstate New York, so for the moment, people are able to eat outside on the benches. There's going to come a point pretty soon where that's no longer an option. So we were told to eat in our cars.
Okay. It's interesting.
So our university put out guidelines for eating and those sorts of spaces. I still like Heather, I've been trying to eat outside as much as possible. That won't always, that won't always work. It doesn't always work when it rains, but so the university, as part of reopening, it talks about making sure that seating is so far away. It talks about the things you need to wipe down. There's instructions about like if you need to use the microwave. But I've tried to not take things that need to be heated. I've tried to be very thoughtful about that. It's not perfect. In special collections itself, the preservation department has an office that's off-site because of a renovation, but the special collections building itself, we're in 4-hour shifts, and you can't work if you work in the morning, you can't work in the afternoon, and vice versa. And so that also is limiting the amount of eating that has to happen.
Also seeing a chart in the chat box and but skipping it to be eating outside so far, and that's what I do when I go to the office. I haven't memorized all of the rules, so I just tend to go outside instead. And I heard someone else start talking. Go ahead.
Oh, I just said thanks. That's all.
And absolutely, winter is coming, as Elizabeth just put in the chat box. And you might notice the lighting here. I'm at home. It's very weird, and that's because we have a storm going through. It's very, very, very dark here, and it's Massachusetts, it's New England. It's going to get very cold very soon. So, yeah, that will no longer be an option. Neither would really go eating in my car and want to. That seems uncomfortable as well. And certainly some snows are coming. That's in Sioux Falls. I'm from Colorado, and I keep seeing my Instagram friends with their sunny days and then the 6 inches of snow overnight. So certainly coming in fits and starts. All right.
I see that
Julia,
I see that Julia pointed out that they have gone back to no food and drink, and that is true for our students. Is that they're not allowed to have food and drink in the library anymore. And in fact, we actually shut down if mask compliance goes below a certain amount. We've had to do it twice, and we closed down for 2 hours. We politely ask the students to put their masks back on, and if they don't do it, then we shut down the library for 2 hours. We've only had to do it twice, so I mean, I guess, but I also happen to know that the students recognize when the staff are coming through, like they've sort of figured out the pattern. So our compliance, I'm sure, is lower than that 95%. But by eliminating food and drink in eating in the library itself, and by having that mask compliance, I think it's been better. And we have tents outside, but again, as it gets colder, it's not like they're heated or anything. But we also are sending our students home at Thanksgiving, and it hasn't been announced officially what's going to happen in the spring, but my understanding is that we're bringing them back significantly later, and that all of our J-term classes are going to be online in an attempt to limit them on grounds.
and also another mention in the chat is just how attendance overall is down. So it makes it some of that more easy, or hopefully more easily handled. That you're not dealing with quite so many people. I like the ideas that you Kara, need to shut down the library if people aren't complying. I think that probably is an effective way to get compliance to happen. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows that they are absolutely welcome to chime in or just listen to the conversation as well. But if we are getting to our wrap up here, I just wanted to make sure that that everyone has an opportunity to chime in. I'm just scrolling through the participants list. But I really encourage anyone to just pipe up if you want to add anything to the conversation.
Someone had asked earlier about the tools that we use, such as the data loggers. And did anybody else want to comment on what their institutions use?
Your sound was cutting out a little bit for me, but I think you were talking about some supplies and equipment.
Yeah, tools like data loggers and water monitors. So if anybody else wanted to make suggestions, it would probably be appreciated.
And it's pretty quiet, so if you do have any suggestions, feel free to just unmute and go ahead in case I'm missing you.
Sure. So at our office, we have the temperature and relative humidity covered with I think the Hobo data loggers, which actually when I went in recently, I had to download all the data because it was packed full from the time that we've been away. But the water monitors are one thing that we had not thought about before because our spaces we sublet within another kind of archival space at the university. And now I'm thinking like, oh, that would be like a really good idea. That said, I don't want them calling me at home. So if anyone has suggestions on the water monitors, that would be amazing.
If you do choose to get the Honeywell, you can order as many cords as you want and just keep stringing them along. So I have I have one monitor and the cord goes all along the top of the bookshelf in an area where I know have been leaks before. But you will get the text potentially in the middle of the night on Friday night.
So it's sounding like maybe doing some product research on some good water monitors is in order. That seems like something that it would be good to know and maybe put out there. We could put it on the listserv as well if we find anything good that we want everyone to know about. So I think that will be a good option. Certainly mentions of the PEM2 or PEM2. I'm not quite sure how IPI wants them pronounced, but those have been great data loggers for a long time. I know that those in the hobos are the ones that I always see used and recommended. I haven't heard of the LASCAR ones. I'm gonna write that down so I can look it up. I always like to know of all the options that are out there because it's so important and helpful to monitor the environment.
That's what I published on. It's a product
okay.
review. So if anybody wants the link, I can send that to you so you don't have to provide otherwise you have to pay for the Charleston Advisor subscription.
Okay, I think we're about at time, so I'll go ahead and let us start with the wrap up. I don't want to cut anyone off, of course, and I will certainly stay on for a few minutes too, just to make sure that we're capturing everything. I imagine we'll save the chat. I know I can save it, or any of us can save it, and then I don't know what we'll do with that, but we'll have the recording available as well. So people can listen in and maybe check it out at their convenience. And Heather just dropped that the article there in the chat box as well. So thank you for that. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope it got some good ideas. It was nice to be able to talk about what's been going on at your organizations, and especially when it comes to coming back to not so fun surprises like the wool casing or the case making wool moths. That's quite the name. things like that, discoveries, and just knowing that you're not alone and that it's happening all over the place. And it's been a tricky situation to deal with. Also, hopefully, for those of you who are back, welcome back to the archives. And for those of you who are not yet back, I hope it continues to go well to work from home, and that you have resources and members of the community that are there for you and want to help you out as well. Certainly our own listserv, the Preservation Section listserv, we do look at it, and if there are questions, hopefully you can get some good answers and suggestions on there as well. So don't forget about that as a good resource to use. So I think that's it for me. I'll give anyone else a chance to chime in if you have any other sort of concluding remarks.
Also, if anybody, sorry, I realize my screen and my camera in different places. If you guys have any other ideas of topics you'd like the preservation section to host in a coffee hour like this, please let us know and we will try to do it again.
All right, I guess I'll just go ahead and sign us off then. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Becky. Can you make sure you go ahead and download the chat since I got kicked out? I want to make sure the whole chat was recorded.
I'll do it right now.
Thank you.